2, 1. And we are live. Welcome everybody to today's webinar, hosted by Trustpair, hosted by Treasury Masterminds. Topic of today, the 500k question, how UK businesses are losing big to payment fraud. Why UK businesses? Because this is a webinar related to a UK survey that Trustpair did recently. Tom will tell more about it, but the outcomes of the survey are definitely relevant for all treasurers and can be much more generalized. My name is Patrick Koens. I will be your moderator for today. I'm founder of Treasury Masterminds and Pecunia Treasury and Finance. Before we start, a few housekeeping rules. The webinar will be recorded, so even if you are not in the webinar currently, you will get a recording once you registered, and it will be put on our website as well. We would love to hear from you, so share your opinion, put it in this chat. Even if you don't have a question, do you have comments, put them in there. We'll definitely read them and try to incorporate them. Also the questions, there is time at the end for questions. If I see them earlier, they are relevant, I will definitely ask them. But without further ado, let's start with the webinar. We have Royston Da Costa, Assistant Treasurer of Ferguson, and Tom Abbey, Senior Fraud Consultant UK at Trustpair. Royston, can you quickly introduce yourself, please?
Thank you, Patrick, and welcome everybody to this session. As Patrick's mentioned, I'm the Assistant Treasurer at Ferguson. We're a North American value-added $39 billion value-added distributor of plumbing and heating products. I am responsible for the Treasury technology and UK intercompany loan structure, and I also support the US Treasury function. I've had 37 years of Treasury experience. Apart from speaking at various international conferences on Treasury technology, I'm a senior lecturer on generative AI's impact on Treasury for a company called CFTE. I'm also Treasury Dragon, where we review Treasury solutions live online pretty much every month. We've also won a Adam Smith Award for Best Cybersecurity Solution in 2019. So you can imagine I'm looking with great excitement and interest to this discussion and reviewing this report.
Yeah, thanks, Royston. It's really good to have you on this panel. You're very valuable. Tom, over to you.
Yeah, no, thank you, Patrick. So my name is Tom Abbey. I am the Senior Fraud Consultant for the UK for Trustpair. My role is supporting kind of mid-market to enterprise-sized businesses on their transformation journey, moving from a very manual kind of traditional S2P process in terms of validation to a more automated world to mitigate and eradicate risk exposure to fraud. To give you guys an overview of Trustpair, we are a French-based fraud prevention solution provider. We were founded in 2017. We have over 400 mid-market to enterprise size clients with the likes of Hiscox, AstraZeneca, Disney, to name a few. And I guess in terms of our USP, we are very much a global player, or one of the only global players on the market, and we give businesses the ability to evaluate suppliers in over 190 countries. I guess a key thing to kind of point out is we align ourselves and partner very closely with the likes of SAP, Kyriba, Oracle, and other finance and procurement vendors to basically best secure their S2P process, customers' S2P processes. We also work with the likes of Deutsche Bank, JP Morgan as a data source, but also as a partner, as they would then refer us into their customers as a best in breed solution to prevent fraud. Yeah. So in terms of the fraud study itself, to give you guys an overview of what we kind of, I guess, reviewed and obviously what we surveyed. So we surveyed over 150 financial professionals. They were all senior in their roles, so director, VP, and C-level, and that was within finance, treasury, and accounts payable. All of the companies were over 250 in terms of their employee size, and this is very much UK focused. We used opinion ways to run the research, and this was done between the 12th of April last year and obviously November this year as well. Last year as well.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Tom, for this intro and also the referring to the survey. like I already mentioned, UK focused, but I think the results, and we'll see more slides about that later, and we have questions on that. They are definitely relevant for treasurers outside the UK as well, because to be honest, fraudsters don't look at necessarily borders. They look at where the money is and where they can scam people and get access to. So let's dive into it. Royston, if I can start with you, given your wealth of knowledge here, involvement in AI and technology, you must have seen fraud evolving as well. Can you give us an overview of how the fraud tactics have changed in the recent years? Maybe a bit
So,
linking them to AI?
sure, Patrick. I mean, sadly, this has become a fact of life for everyone now, regardless whether you work in Treasury or any other industry for that matter. I think for me, if you have to go back probably a few years, 5-6 years, when the CEO scam email first brought to light in a big way, how specifically Treasury were seen as a major target for cyber fraud. And you can see the rationale behind that, because we handle payments, obviously, but also the reason or rationale behind why it's evolved. So I think initially what we all had to recognize in Treasury, I mean everyone, is how broad this area is, how easy it is for the cyber criminal to target the corporates, but also how important it is for us, and I mean individually as much as corporates and Treasury departments, make ourselves aware of the scams and the potential tax they use out there. I mean, this report's amazing, excellent in many ways, because it does highlight the fact that, whether you think you've been hacked or not is not the issue here. 93% is what the statistic bears out, have been attacked, and 42% twice. So, I mean, every report I've seen pretty much says very similar thing. It's happening. There's no point trying to deny that. And now what we're dealing with is, as the technology evolves, as much as AI, I think, is still a very important and really many benefits to us if used correctly, it is being used by the nefarious criminals and for nefarious purposes out there. So you've heard of deep fake, and I know that Tom's going to talk about an example later on, but AI is being used by the criminals, and therefore we need to also, in Treasury particularly, be not just aware, but also review, and I'll talk a bit more about this later on, our processes, because frankly, any entry point that the cyber criminal can see, and that's the important point here, they can see the weak point. So it's incumbent upon us in Treasury to also make sure that we are identifying and reviewing what our potential weak points are, because that's what they'll use to get in. And let's be clear, they're not just going for the large companies or the large amounts. Sometimes it's small, little, but often. But the last thing I'm going to say is the banks and corporates, certainly the larger ones, have all recognized how important this area is. And thankfully, and quite wisely, in my view, are beginning to invest significantly in cybersecurity.
Yep. Thanks, Royston. I think in the preparation we talked about you're only as good as your weakest chain. And we heard a lot of people saying it happens to others, it won't happen to me, obviously. And I think the statistics here show very differently. It could be the others, but that's 7% then only. You're probably part of the 93%. So you better take action. Very important point. And if you get hit, we've seen some numbers there. We mentioned 500K, but it could be millions, and then it's really hurting you. Good. Tom, obviously you work at Trustpair, so you see the issues of many clients, what they are facing. Can you share a bit about trends, what you're seeing in the fraud prevention, and how do you help them?
No, of course. I think, kind of as we're on this slide, it's probably good to give a bit of an overview in terms of this. And I guess these are very much those kind of rock star, kind of high end kind of cases you see that obviously make the press. For example, with Arup, a member of their team was sent a CEO scam by one of their C-suite and told that they were going for an acquisition and merger. That person obviously had a line of defense thinking, actually, I need to speak to these people to obviously release the money. They joined a call and their senior leadership team had been deepfaked. So the face had been changed, voice had been cloned, language had been copied. So the communication style is replicated, and that's given that person that sense of security. So they've then obviously transferred out 25 million, which is obviously a huge amount. And they're the ones that make the press. But as you mentioned, kind of Royston, they're kind of little and often cases happening every single day. And they are very much more basic and kind of everyday type of kind of risk exposures or type of attempts or kind of failures. And if we look at this slide here, we see a very common one, which is a vendor email compromisation. So I have the ability to take over a supplier's email address. I could then just sit in the background and just see how the communication is flowing, and look for those vulnerabilities. I could even log into a onboarding platform. I could do a forgot password, and I could change my bank details. So there's ways like that. Fake invoices. We can see doctored invoices coming through that have been changed. A lot of businesses still ask for letterheads. Very easy to kind of doctor those as well, and we can see those coming into the system. There's also potential around internal fraud. So when we're going out to payment files, there's the opportunity for people internally to add their own bank details, which we saw with the likes of British Airways. So there's elements of risk even internally that are coming to play. And a big one is also data quality. So that static master data that we have within businesses that is sitting there and is not being updated regularly just presents that level of risk in terms of our data integrity and our risk exposure. And actually, probably the most common one is human error. So just updating bank details, input errors, or missing something, or just a change to come through and we haven't acted upon it, is meaning that we are then open to fraud risk. I think I said when we previously spoke that kind of fraudsters only need to be lucky once. Our team needs to be lucky every single time. So having those human processes in place is a highly risky kind of venture.
Yeah, very interesting. Royston, if you look at it, if you take these points, put them into Treasury, I think the main focus is on from a payment perspective. What can treasurers do to secure their payments, to prevent fraud? And maybe to add to that, should Treasury be in the lead with this, or should they rely on the IT? Should it be joined?
Yeah, basically all of that, to be honest. But I would say fundamentally, and I've always maintained this, when we look at this area of payment and payment fraud, I believe I'm a believer of processes. You know, it's important that you first of all review your processes within the company. As I said before about any points of weakness. So as much as people are our weakest link, they are also our strongest defense, frankly, in my view. And so getting that right initially is very important. Getting your processes, making sure you identify any loopholes, making sure you have segregation, and so on and so forth. But technology has to and does play, I should say, can play a huge part in how you then kind of, make it more robust. One thing I think people tend to have and companies have sometimes is complacency. I think Tom mentioned it before. There's an assumption that, this is not likely to happen to us because we're too small or whatever reason people come up with. Well, we know that's to be false because cyber criminals are agnostic. They don't care who they target as long as it's easy and it's lucrative. So, and bear in mind, as human beings, we have people go off on holiday, people can fall sick, and sometimes people leave. So in those sort of scenarios, if your process is not robust enough to handle this situation, that's where the technology is very useful. And I think more so we should rely on that technology. I also maintain that in terms of when it comes to payments, we are, in terms of corporates, responsible for making sure that this payment's secure up to the point it's released from our network, let's call it that, or our, sort of our internet, or it's not internet, our intranet. Once it hits or is received by the bank, it's incumbent upon the bank or the financial institution to ensure that it's securely processed. So there's an element in the middle where, and it's interesting, the statistic on this report saying 48% of attacks are aimed at payment platforms. And this is why I'm mentioning this. Again, very important how our processes around using platforms are designed and sort of put in place. And this is where we'll talk later about how policy comes into play and looking at and using internal audit and IT stakeholders to support you in that journey. But without question, payments will be a major target for the cyber criminal, and because it's got a huge incentive, huge return on investment for them, and equally for us, it's important that we focus on that and ensure that we're doing everything within our power and using the right tools to make those payments safely, securely.
Good point, because we could even protect our processes, our tools, and SFTPs, make everything safe. But then there's this deepfake CFO calling you and saying, "Oh no, this is very urgent. I'm doing a very important M&A. Forget the processes, Royston. I'm relying on you." Then all your processes are out. They're gone.
This is a very good point. I want to address that specifically, Patrick, if I may. It really, this is going back 10, 15 years in terms of my experience where, it was possible, certainly not in Ferguson, but I was aware of other companies where the responsibility was almost left with one person to enter the payment, to validate beneficial, or at least to approve the payment and to transmit the payment. Clearly, I hope, if not everyone, most companies don't allow that today. The important point here to mention, I'll say, is to make sure that the ability to making a payment is removed from just one person, because then immediately you don't allow this is a loophole, frankly, for the cyber criminal, because exactly that can happen where cyber criminal can pretend to be the CEO and enforce or use their authority to fool the employee to think that they're obviously their job could be on the line if they don't follow the instruction of the CEO. If it's a policy decision or process embedded that says whatever happens or whatever instruction you receive, it is impossible for one person, for you alone, to make that payment, then whoever the person is, whether CEO, CFO, whoever senior, even the senior manager, knows, or well, not knows, but they wouldn't be able to influence that employee. And it's important also from a morale perspective, because no one wants to be a victim. And unfortunately, generally, the people that sometimes tend to be the victims are the ones that, let's say, at the lowest, sort of low in the food chain. And it's not great if someone suddenly, sort of finds out that they've been part of this scam. They're the ones that have the anxiety and the sort of embarrassment, if you like, of having been part of that scam or being the victim of that scam. Well, so it's not good from that perspective as well.
Yeah, just say no to your CEO if he calls, right? or just double check with your colleagues, with the group treasurer. If in doubt, ask a second opinion. I think that's the
the very least, yes.
Yes, yeah, good. Tom, over to you. In the registrations, we saw also a lot of people asking about AI. AI is obviously helping us detect fraud, but on the other hand, AI is also helping the fraudsters be more advanced. Deepfakes, voice cloning, everything. They're getting more professional. They're not making typos anymore in their emails. They use ChatGPT. They're getting much more professional. So it's a race. Who's more professional? Who's faster? How do we keep up? What should treasurers do?
Yeah, I think there's kind of two elements to this. Like you said, there's obviously how we're using it to defend ourselves, but also how the fraudsters are using it. And I think we need to remember these fraudsters are not just someone sitting in their bedroom. They are multi-million-pound businesses in themselves, and the sophistication that they use in these attacks is very, very well thought out and very well cadenced. So I guess in terms of tools we are then using internally. So it's obviously forensic tools to pick up those doctored invoices. We can pick up even pixel changes in documents to make sure that we're not consuming fraudulent documents. But then having those kind of processes in place to then eliminate stuff like the deep fakes and the kind of CEO scams. So having, as Royston said, those kind of almost approval workflows in place to protect us against those threats as well.
Yep, thanks, Tom. But Royston, if you hear this, it's all good and nice, but it has to be operationally efficient as well. Treasurers used to have manual processes, automation, making it faster. Now we're adding layers of protection, fraud, which is good. But I can imagine a multinational company adding layers to payments, fraud checks, operational efficiency. How do we tackle it?
Absolutely great question. And Patrick, there's a school of thought which you might smile at when I tell you what it is. In theory, you could go back 20, 30 years when, in Treasury, it was quite common to have a standalone PC, not connected, well, the internet wasn't available those days, connected to a modem. And one would argue that is probably a more secure way of making payments today than the platforms that we're using. And it'd be hard to disagree with that. But think of the reality and think of the efficiency or potential efficiency that might not be able to yield. It's not practical as well. So it's pointless trying to think of, how can we find sort of like go back 30 years to find a more secure way of making it? That's not, that's not an option. So my point would be that we are working with technology. It's important that we recognize and we utilize the technology and the tools available today. But as always with Treasury, there is no compromise, in my view, for being cautious and diligent. And I go back to the processes. I hate to be a kind of repeat that same mantra, but it's true. That goes without saying. But once you've identified, a process that you're comfortable with, that you feel will protect your employees and your payments, use the technology to its fullest. And that's, I think, the game changer for me, because, there are certain aspects within certain processes, I'm sure with every company, there will be a manual intervention. There has to be to some degree, even if it's approvals. But then when you think of some of the technology solutions, even Trustpair is a great example in terms of protecting, your company from that cyber. We actually, another thing I wanted to mention here, we don't often, we take for granted, let's put it this way, antivirus software, whether it's Norton McAfee, it's running in the background. We see, no one questions having that antivirus software, but it's so important. I think everyone would recognize not having it is not a good thing. So my point is that, why not use the technology that's available to us to protect us so we don't need to worry about things that we haven't got direct control over, but at the same time, enable us to make or at least complete those processes more efficiently. So certainly within Ferguson, with this TMS solution we've got, which is Cooper, we've used the technology. First of all, we can approve payments through a mobile app. And we've also kind of created structures so the payments are locked down, no free format payments allowed, and no one person can approve a payment. So all the normal, I call them normal kind of controls that you'd expect to see. But what's so important for me is that the process is very efficient, in my view. It's very easy to operate, and there's complete visibility. That's another good point to bear in mind. When you're looking at processes, you want to have multiple eyes on it without necessarily, making it cumbersome. And this is all possible with the technology that's available today.
Exactly. So the goal is not full automation, but automation with taking into account your checks, your controls, your processes to prevent fraud in any case. Even one case isn't worth it for a bit more automation, compromising a bit of security. And I'm fully with you there. Okay. We promised the audience also real life use cases, tech advice, AI automation are out there. What concretely can we use there? Tom, you first. What tools, what AI automations, what can help us fight fraud?
In terms of fighting fraud, so I can probably speak from a Trustpair point of view. So within our kind of evaluation of suppliers process, we have stuff like machine learning. So we can consume payment files and understand the context and history of a payment process to understand, I guess, our kind of exposure to risk with that supplier. Also stuff like email risk scoring as well. So when we are evaluating suppliers, we can consume an email address, and that person might have picked or missed a very small alteration to that email address, and could have potentially just gone straight to kind of accepting the changes or paying an invoice as an example, because they might be tired as an example. So we have the ability to score that email, and we can understand, one, if it meets kind of security standards, how long it's been active. If there's kind of red flags in that, we understand that then that's probably not a legitimate person you should be paying. So there's stuff like that. Also, we can consume documents, as I mentioned earlier, in terms of invoices or letterheads, and we have AI forensic tools that give us the ability to pick out even pixel differences within those logos or documents. So we know that they've been obviously fraudulent and they've been doctored. So we can very much use that to prevent errors in there.
Yeah, and when are these checks done? Is it from ERP to TMS or to bank? At what step do you come in?
Yeah, great question. So there's kind of three main points that we look at. The first, and it's probably the most risky, is kind of onboarding. So during that kind of S2P process, when a new supplier comes to you, it's basically the creation of that vendor. So adding bank details, we then can natively sit within current process or ecosystem, and we can validate that supplier's, one, their entity, and then two, their bank account, and then finally the correlation between those two pools of data. The second part is the master data as well. So we have the ability to audit a customer's entire master data file. We can then forevermore monitor that master data. So removing the stagnation of that data and ensuring it's more of a live data set. We can then monitor and report on any events or changes that are happening within that master data. So pulling out a potential closed account, fraudulent, blacklisted supplier, and giving the customer that visibility in terms of those changes as well. And then the final element is payments. So we can sit just before a TMS, we can consume the payment files. We can pick out anomalies. We can pick out duplicate payments. We can also see stuff where potentially someone's added their own bank details because the supplier, it can't be evaluated anymore. So what we're doing is just eliminating any risk exposure along the way to ensure that by the time we get to the money being obviously dispatched, we are confident that the correct person is being paid and they're not a fraudulent business.
Yeah. Okay, interesting. So the first two are really about your data and not necessarily Treasury or TMS and the payment yet, but it will lead to a payment. We had a send-in question from one of the registrants. I'm not sure if he's here, and it related to what should a TMS vendor be doing, and where does a specialized firm like you come in? I think you partly gave in the answer that you are bigger, not only focused on the TMS part, payments part, but some TMS vendors also offer this functionality only on the payments part. Can you elaborate? You mentioned you work with some of the TMS vendors.
Yes, we work closely with the likes of Kyriba as an example. Where we would add value is basically just giving them confidence that the data going into the platform in the first place is of high integrity. So they are paying the correct supplier. We also have that visibility across the master data. So again, just ensuring the data is correct. And then finally, just eliminating risk of internal fraud as well throughout that payment file.
Mm-hmm. Okay, interesting. Royston, with your experience hearing all these AI tools, happy to hear if there are any tools we've missed, we didn't talk about yet, and the one which you think is the most effective in your experience.
Okay. Well, let me describe a bit about what we're doing at Ferguson, maybe just to give you sort of like our perspective on this. And I will use the analogy, even though it might be a bit crude, of a car. And it's been overused for many other situations. But frankly, for me, sort of cybersecurity is a bit like that in a sense. So when you take your car into a garage to get it looked over or checked once a year, we call it MOT in the UK. The garage will give you a warranty, or at least will certify the car's, roadworthy and all that. From an insurance perspective, it's not the garage that then is responsible for how you drive the car. You are. So quite often, if most insurance policies say if you leave the car unattended, and worse still, you leave the keys in the car, there's no way you'll receive cover for any theft or any damage that happens to the car in that situation. I think when you look at cybersecurity, the same should apply in terms of companies. And I believe from an IT perspective, they are gatekeepers. They will protect and try and protect us from the vast majority of cyber attack or scams. But we are still individually all responsible for how we, control or at least look after those individual keys that we have for the areas that we're responsible for. So I say, in terms of cybersecurity, you've got antivirus, malware, firewall, so on and so forth. We also conduct online training, which is regular. Now, it can vary, depend on the company you work for, but it should be regular training. That's the important point, to keep your employees up to date. I think it's very useful as well. We also have what we call routine tests, which our IT department are managed. They will send out emails purporting to be genuine, but it's incumbent upon us, and this goes in line hand in hand with the training, to ensure that we spot this could be a scam. And there are certain sort of options you can choose if you believe it's scam to kind of report that email. And I think that's so important as well, to increase awareness among your staff. We employ ethical hackers, like most companies do, to help with trying to kind of keep that step, keep up at least, if not one step ahead. And I think this is the word, in my view, for this area. And it's a well-known word, collaboration. So as much as we can talk about all the tools in the world, you cannot replace, working together. And I say working together, I mean with trusted counterparties and, we call it banks, vendors, companies like Trustpair, whatever resource that exists out there that you feel you can partner with, I think these are key. So if you ask me to name one tool that I think has made the biggest difference, in my view, in terms of this area, I would say it's vendor validation.
Okay, fair. Makes sense. Obviously, it's the combination between the many, and again, reference to the weakest chain. Human element, I like it, and I have a few questions about that. Tom, let's start with you. I think human element is part of your assessment, what you're doing with your clients. So where do you see the biggest gaps in knowledge and training? How do you determine where a client is at, what they need to do, what's their starting point is? How do you tell them, assess them?
Yes, so to give you kind of a real life example, I was speaking to a large pharmaceutical business a couple of weeks ago, and I was joined on the call by their FD, who, as soon as I joined the call, said, "Tom, I don't see the value in your solution. We have good awareness training. We have people doing manual callbacks. I think that's fine." So I was like, okay. And then he invited on their kind of STP process owner on. And yeah, he kind of said, I don't get involved in the nuts and bolts. I just kind of see top level. And I said, cool, that's fine. But I think then when we started to go through the process and kind of see, well, yeah, that's actually a massive risk exposure in terms of the email compromisation and what that could be in terms of output. Going through that kind of process, kind of you could see his jaw slowly move closer and closer to the ground. So in terms of what I see as kind of advice and I guess risk areas is just lack of visibility from kind of senior level down to kind of process owners and process I guess contributors. So it's just that lack of visibility. And I guess the overarching piece of this study is the fraud paradox. So that overconfidence, I think it is just probably globally inherent issue that needs to be resolved. So my advice would be to focus on obviously educating your team, as Royston said, focusing on that awareness training, putting out tests to the team to ensure that they're always on the ball, marrying that with your internal processes in terms of manual input, so approval processes, but keeping them lean so you're not adding bottlenecks during that process, as we said, and then switching where possible from manual to automated processes. But in that kind of same breath, investing for best in breed technology as well. Do not settle for partial solutions. So, for example, confirmation of payee. Great that we're doing this and we're moving in the right direction, but it's very much a partial solution. It doesn't work globally. And most businesses we speak to have global supply lists. So looking at a best in class solution to give you that validation, as Royston said, across the board.
Yeah.
And can I just add that, Patrick, my view, it's a very good example that Tom's given, because quite often, unfortunately, Treasury, see this, and it's a cost. When you look at some of these, sort of solutions that need to mitigate the risk that we manage, and it's unfortunate that we see it that way. It's perceived as cost. When you approach it from a perspective that, you can go, when we talk about this towards the end, I'm sure, about what are your crown jewels, what is the core, what's the most valuable asset in your business, and that's what's at risk. And you bring in IT and audit. In my experience, those are your major partners when it comes to implementing any kind of technology solution, but more importantly, something that involves cyber fraud or sort of mitigating the risk to that. They will be the first to endorse and support your business case to anyone in the company, especially the CFO. And that's what carried us through, frankly, when we looked at our TMS solution back in the day, because the controls that we were able to embed in that technology was so significant. I mean, and when you have audit saying, yeah, we think this is great, and IT saying, yeah, absolutely, we think this is like gold standard technology in terms of risk management. What CFO or CEO in any company would not want to sign off on that? And we're not talking about millions of dollars here. We all know in Treasury we're limited to budget. We're talking about minimal cost to protect your company from an exponential loss, which $500,000 is very conservative in this respect. But I think if you go global, you'll see the value going a lot higher, I'm sure.
Yeah, good points. But then, of course, you have these trainings, you have all this information coming from IT, audit. They are still considered as, I need to do another training. I need to click through it. I need to do a test at the end. So I actually need to pay attention. And yes, you're getting tested like, is this a fraud email? And some of them are really good. So how do you prevent your organization, and first you, Royston, from overwhelming them with information and annoying them too much with this information?
So I guess it does depend on how you approach this area. For us in Ferguson, it's not at all an annoyance. If anything, it's a welcome kind of step for us, at least from my perspective. Maybe I'm biased, but I do think for a number of reasons. One, the tests aren't like an exam. You're not sitting in a 3-hour exam to do this test. So, and invariably they involve videos, short videos, and sort of pictures and what have you. So it's like a slide presentation, and you're given a scenario, and you're asked to identify whether you think this is right or wrong. So they don't have to be boring or kind of oh god, this is heavy going. It needs to be kind of fairly interactive and needs to be realistic as well. So I think that's important. But if you do it in short but often sound bites, I think that helps to not make it seem really onerous. I mean, I know you can't have it every week, but every company will know what would be suitable for them. I think there's another aspect to this that we need to recognize. This isn't a nice to have. Okay, let's be clear about this. We're talking about huge stakes here. So in our company, there are incentives applied in the sense that if you, let's say, fall prey to a scam email, an internal one, admittedly, then you are required to sit the test. So that's number one. Okay. If you repeatedly fail, like twice, then it becomes a longer test that you have to sit. So there's that incentive as well. And it's a good thing in a way, because it's trying to make sure that you are training yourself to not fail and to be more vigilant, because that's what we all need to be, not just in our companies, but our own personal lives. So we have to think of it in that respect as well. And I think it's incumbent on all of us to, I know it's not a natural thing to want to do, but coming along to listen to this type of webinar is one source of getting yourself equipped with the right skill set. But you can also watch YouTube videos. You can, say companies themselves are doing some training, as I've described. But there are lots of other interesting ways, depending on what your particular medium of interaction is. If you want to pick up a book or you want to watch a YouTube video, you go to a conference, there's so many different resources. Even Treasury Masterminds, you're always putting some really interesting blogs and topics on this in this subject. So I think we as individuals cannot afford to ignore this area, but then obviously more importantly, the companies we work for, we are responsible individually to protect what we're doing for that company. And so I think you can't afford to think in those terms anymore, because we have to do this. I think it's important.
Yeah, no, good points, and I like the in small chunks bits and strategy. I've seen my fair share of companies. Often you get a big chunk at the beginning. You have 10 mandatory trainings on your first week, and cyber is one of them. You get your check mark and you move on. So I love these tests. Do you have any numbers on how many people fail the first and the second? Is that something you know or can share, Royston?
I'm quite good. No, I don't. I can't say. I mean, I'd like to say that it's not. Certainly, not a huge percentage, because that would be very worrying. I mean, I think the vast majority of employees in our company are. Because let's be clear, this is not something we just started yesterday. This has been done over years. Sort of like from my recollection, probably at least 10 years, maybe. So these tests are not just sort of starting with, do you know what malware is? Obviously, we have to know what it is. It's trying to bring you up to speed what's happening today. So it's going through the basics, but the basics are becoming more and more familiar to everyone every day as each year goes past. But it's also making you aware of what the latest scam is, because, like you said, like Tom mentioned early on about the deep fake kind of scam. But as I said before, policies and processes are also very important to help protect against that type of scam. But no, I would be very confident. I can't give you a number. I would say it's in the minority. It's a very small percentage. Typically someone who may be even new to the company, was just maybe, I'm not saying, because they're younger necessarily, but someone who's probably not got as much experience in this area.
Yeah, no, indeed. And I'm going to be honest, I failed once as well, a test with a client. And afterwards it was obvious, but I was in a situation, I was stressed, doing things quickly, and I clicked. The moment I clicked, I was like, oh no, this is probably not right. And then I already clicked and I was too late. And I got feedback, IT, oh, you did wrong. And I was like, oh my God, I didn't think I would have fallen for that, but I did. But fair.
Even you're not perfect, Patrick, which is kind of hopefully
exactly.
reassures everyone that it can
exactly.
happen to anyone.
Yeah, even the Treasury guru failed. No, that's fine. Last 3 minutes. Tom, over to you. We might have inspired some people, listeners, to revisit their processes, their automation, their tech, to improve their defenses. So where should they start? If they have nothing or bits in places, what are your top 3 of what could they immediately start tomorrow, the day after, on protecting themselves? The quick wins.
Definitely. I guess a quick win would be looking at onboarding. So a big risk exposure is in that process, but also within the manual validation of vendors. So obviously teams have accounts payable teams that will manually validate those suppliers, as well as shared service centers, and they do a great job with the resources they have. But unfortunately, language barriers, time zone barriers mean that obviously the callback process cannot be rigorous enough, and it still leaves risk exposure in terms of automated validation. So I think in terms of top 3, it would be adding layers of automated validation in process. as Royston said, I think definitely focus on that kind of small and often in terms of training. Like no one wants to go through a hour-long security training session. And I think, yeah, keeping it into real life scenarios and adding in those new kind of on the forefront cases like deepfake, so people have exposure and visibility over how they will come across as well.
Yeah. Anything to add, Royston?
But perhaps again, it's so important for me. Review processes, number one. Cyber insurance, if you haven't got it, I think it's a very good thing to look at taking out, because not only gives you that obvious protection, but they also help with the education aspect of it, because they will train you, they'll help you create a cyber crime response team, that so on and so forth. And clearly obtain the right tools. Every company is different, but it doesn't excuse us from not making sure we have the right tools, solutions to protect our companies, because as individuals, we might be excellent, we might be very good, but no one's perfect. And so the technology sometimes, and quite often, is that fail stop plug, if you like.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's a very nice note and sentence to end. Nobody's perfect. It can happen to you, so you better be protected or insured. Thanks, Tom. Thanks, Royston. I learned a bit today. I hope the audience did as well. Final note for the audience, we put the link to the survey results in the chat. Feel free to have a look at them. We only touched them very high level. There's much more details in the survey results. Would be very interesting to have a look at. Thanks, Tom. Thanks, Royston, for being on this webinar and sharing your insights. Very valuable. Thanks, audience, for joining and or listening later to the recording of this webinar. Cheers, guys. Thanks, and enjoy the rest of your day.